Wild Stallion dragged Mountain Man to cave. What he discovers will shock you. A lone mountain man sets a trap for a thieving stallion, but when the wild beast bolts dragging him across frozen ground, it doesn't just lead him to danger. It drags him into a hidden cave. Inside, he stumbles upon something no one could have expected: a wounded boy clinging to his dying mother, and a secret powerful enough to shake the whole frontier. Whispers of broken treaties, men in town who would kill to bury the truth, a deputy with iron keys and a greedy eye, and one boy's fate hanging in the balance. The stallion won't stop circling. The preacher says God isn't finished, and the mountain man, once dead inside, faces a choice that could cost him his life. Will he protect the boy and honor a dying promise, or will the secrets in that cave be lost forever beneath the snow? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The winter wind whistled through the towering pines. As Rico Boone's axe bit deep into another log, splinters flew as he worked, his breath forming clouds in the crisp mountain air. The rough-hewn cabin behind him stood silent against the white landscape of the Colorado Highlands, a thin trail of smoke rising from its stone chimney. "Daggum Stallion," Rico muttered, his weathered face creasing with frustration. "Third time. This week, that black devil's raided my stores." He paused to wipe his brow, leaning on the axe handle as he surveyed the trampled snow around his food cache. Fresh hoofprints told the tale the wild horse had struck again. The mountain man's calloused hands worked quickly, fashioning a crude trap from rawhide strips. His fingers, though numbed by cold, remembered the knots from years of trapping. "Reckon it's time to teach that horse some manners," he said to the empty air, his voice rough from disuse. Inside his cabin that evening, Rico stirred a pot of beans hanging over the hearth. The fire's warmth barely touched the loneliness that had settled into his bones years ago. After Sarah, he pushed the thought away, focusing instead on his meager supper. A sudden commotion exploded outside, the crack of breaking branches and the distinctive sound of thrashing hooves. Rico's heart leaped. His trap had worked. He burst through the cabin door, boots crunching in the snow. There, in the gathering dusk, stood the magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming like wet ink. The rawhide loop had caught around its neck, but the horse's eyes blazed with defiance. Before Rico could react, the stallion wheeled and bolted. The loose end of the rawhide lariat, which Rico had foolishly left coiled near the trap, snaked out and wrapped around his wrist. Pain shot through his arm as the rope pulled taut. "No!" he shouted, but it was too late. His feet left the ground as the powerful horse dragged him forward. The world became a blur of pain and cold. Rico's body bounced against frozen earth and scraped over rocks. Thorns tore at his clothes and skin as the horse plunged through thickets. He tried to dig in his heels to somehow stop this wild ride, but the stallion's strength was unstoppable. They crashed through a ravine, ice-cold water soaking through Rico's clothes. His consciousness began to fade, the brutal journey taking its toll. The moon rose high above the mountains, casting silver light over the nightmare scene. Just when Rico thought he couldn't hold on any longer, the horse made a sharp turn. Through swollen eyes, he saw the dark mouth of a cave loom before them. The stallion plunged inside, dragging Rico's battered body over the threshold. The mountain man's head struck something hard, and for a moment, everything went black. When his vision cleared, he found himself lying on the cave floor, the rawhide finally loosed around his wrist. The stallion stood in the shadows, sides heaving, but it wasn't the horse that held Rico's attention. There, in the dim light, filtering through the cave entrance, a pair of dark eyes stared back at him. A young Apache boy, no more than 12 years old, crouched protectively over a woman lying still on a bed of pine boughs. The boy's eyes never left him, filled with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Behind him, the woman stirred weakly, her face drawn with pain. The mountain man lay there, his own pain forgotten as he took in the scene before him. The woman's breathing was shallow, her skin pale beneath its bronze tone. She was badly hurt. That much was clear even in the cave's poor light. The wild stallion that had dragged him here pawed at the ground, as if satisfied with what it had done. Rico's wondering gaze moved between the horse and the two Apache refugees. Somehow, impossibly, the very animal that had been raiding his supplies had brought him exactly where he was needed most. In that moment, looking into the boy's wary eyes and seeing the wounded mother's desperate state, Rico Boone felt something shift inside his grief-hardened heart. The isolation of his mountain existence fell away, replaced by a clarity he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. These people needed help, and somehow that wild stallion had known it. Rico's head throbbed as consciousness fully returned. The cave's dim light filtered through its narrow entrance, casting long shadows on the rough walls. Every muscle in his body screamed from the wild dragging he'd endured. Blood trickled from dozens of cuts where thorns and rocks had torn his clothing and skin. As his vision cleared, he saw the Apache boy still crouched by his mother. Now the youth clutched a gleaming knife, its blade catching what little light reached into the cave. The boy's dark eyes never left Rico. Watching every movement with the intensity of a cornered wolf, Rico tried to sit up slowly, wincing. "No harm," he said, keeping his voice soft and steady. The boy's grip tightened on the knife. A streak of dried blood marked his mother's deerskin dress, and her breathing came in ragged gasps that echoed off the cave walls. "Taza," her voice barely carrying across the cave. "His name is Taza." Her English, though halting, was clear enough. "I am running stream." Rico nodded, careful to keep his movements slow. "I'm Rico Boone. You're hurt bad, ma'am." "Bounty hunters," she said, each word seeming to cost her great effort. "They came at night, killed our family. We escaped, but—" Her voice trailed off as pain twisted her features. Taza spoke rapid Apache to his mother, his young face fierce with worry. She answered softly in their language, touching his arm. The boy's shoulders remained tense, but he lowered the knife. Slightly. "Need to get a fire going," Rico said. "Night's coming, and it's powerful cold in here." He gestured toward the cave entrance. "If I fetch some wood," Running Stream nodded, though Taza's grip on the knife tightened again. Rico moved carefully, gathering dry branches and tinder from just outside the cave. His battered body protested every movement, but he pushed through the pain. Snow had started falling, thick flakes swirling in the growing darkness. The wild stallion stood like a shadow near the cave mouth, its coat blending with the gathering night. It tossed its head and snorted as Rico passed, but made no move to run. Back inside, Rico built a small fire, his experienced hands quickly coaxing flames from the tinder. Warmth began to push back the cave's chill. He pulled a strip of jerky from his coat pocket, holding it out. "You must be hungry, boy." Taza stared at the offered food, mistrust warring with obvious hunger on his young face. His mother spoke softly to him in Apache, and finally, the boy reached out and snatched the jerky. He retreated quickly, but soon was tearing into the dried meat with the intensity of someone who hadn't eaten in days. Rico turned his attention to Running Stream. "Ma'am, those wounds need tending." He pulled his water skin from his belt. "I know something about healing." "My wife," he stopped, the old grief catching in his throat. "I can help, if you'll let me." She nodded weakly. Taza protested, but she spoke to him firmly in Apache. The boy backed away slightly, though his dark eyes never left Rico's hands as the mountain man approached. Rico worked quickly but gently, cleaning the worst of the wounds with boiled water. He gathered fresh pine sap from near the cave entrance, mixing it with herbs from his coat pocket to make a poultice. "This will help fight the fever," he explained as he worked. Outside, the snow fell harder. The stallion's occasional neighing echoed through the cave, mixing with the crack and pop of the fire. Rico had just finished binding the last of Running Stream's wounds when she gripped his arm with surprising strength. "The pouch," she whispered, her eyes bright with fever. Her trembling hands pulled a leather bag from beneath her dress. Documents. Inside, maps. Treaties, proof of promises broken. Her breathing grew more labored. "Railroad men, Indian agents, they lie. Take our land, these papers show truth. Papers show truth." Rico took the pouch, feeling the weight of paper inside. Running Stream's grip tightened on his arm. "Protect Taza," she pleaded, her voice growing fainter. "Keep him safe. Keep the documents safe. Promise me." Rico looked into her eyes, seeing the desperate love of a mother facing her final moments. He thought of Sarah, of promises made and kept, of purpose lost and perhaps now found again. "I promise," he said softly. Tears slid down Running Stream's face as she turned to Taza. The boy had crept closer, his former defiance crumbling as he sensed the gravity of the moment. She spoke to him in Apache, her words carrying the weight of a final blessing. Taza's hand found hers, clinging tight as the snow continued to fall outside their shelter. And the wild stallion stood guard in the gathering night as dawn's pale. Light crept into the cave. Running Stream's breathing grew softer, like wind through winter grass. Taza knelt beside her, his small hand gripping hers. Rico watched from near the fire, his own heart heavy with memories of another deathbed vigil. The final breath came quiet as falling snow. Taza made no sound, but tears tracked down his face, dropping onto his mother's still hand. Rico saw the boy's shoulders tremble, though he fought to stay strong even in his grief. Rico stood slowly, his joints stiff from the cold. "We need to lay her to rest proper," he said softly. With dignity, Taza looked up, dark eyes glistening. He spoke in Apache, gesturing toward the cave entrance. Though Rico didn't understand the words, he nodded. "I'll make a litter. Won't take long." Outside, the morning air bit sharp and clean. Rico gathered straight branches, testing each for strength. His knife stripped away smaller twigs until he had 2 sturdy poles. His shirt, already torn from the stallion's wild run, provided strips to lash crosspieces. Each movement sent pain through his battered body, but he worked steadily. The wild stallion watched from the tree line, its coat dark against the snow. It pawed the ground once, snorting clouds of steam before melting away into the forest. Back in the cave, Rico spread his coat over the crude litter. Taza helped him lift Running Stream's body, laying her gently on the branches. The boy arranged her hands, speaking soft words Rico couldn't understand but recognized as prayer. They carried her together through deepening snow. Rico in front, Taza behind. A grove of ancient pines stood about a quarter-mile from the cave, their branches heavy with white. Rico set down his end of the litter. "Here," he said, "she rests peaceful under these old trees." The ground was frozen hard as iron. Rico's shovel, fetched from his cabin the day before, rang against the earth. Each strike sent shudders through his arms, but he dug steadily, stopping only to wipe sweat from his face, despite the cold. Hours passed. Marked by the shovel's rhythm and Taza's silent vigil beside his mother's body, snow began falling as Rico finished the grave. Thick flakes swirling down through the pine boughs. He helped Taza lower Running Stream's body wrapped now in Rico's coat. The boy placed a string of bright beads around her neck, treasures kept hidden during their flight. Rico hadn't prayed proper since Sarah died, but words came back to him now, rusty but sincere. "Lord," he whispered, "take this good woman home. Watch over her boy." He paused, throat tight, "and help me keep my promise." They filled the grave together, working until the last earth was patted smooth. Taza placed more beads on the mound. Arranging them in patterns Rico suspected held meaning he couldn't read, the boy's lips moved in silent prayer, his face solemn beyond his years. The short winter day was fading when they returned to the cave. Rico built up the fire and set his dented pot to heat, adding dried meat and the last of his beans to make a simple stew. His body ached from the day's labor, cuts and bruises making themselves known now that the work was done. This time, when Rico offered food, Taza took the tin cup without hesitation. The boy ate steadily, hunger finally overcoming grief. Rico saw exhaustion in every line of his small frame. "Sleep," Rico said gently. "I'll keep watch." Taza curled up near the fire, using Rico's saddle blanket as a pillow. His breathing soon steadied into the deep rhythm of exhausted slumber. Only then did Rico pull out the leather pouch Running Stream had pressed into his hands. The documents inside were carefully folded, some yellow with age. Rico spread them on his knee, holding them close to the FIRELIGHT. Maps came first, drawn with careful detail showing valleys and water sources throughout Apache territory. Notes in flowing script marked the best grazing lands, places where springs ran year-round. Rico's throat tightened as he understood these were the fertile grounds promised to the tribes in exchange for peace. More papers followed, treaties with official seals, letters between railroad men and Indian agents. Rico read slowly. Together, a story of broken promises and backroom deals. The treaties guaranteed the Apache these lands forever, but the letters spoke of secret plans to claim the best valleys for the railroad, to force the tribes onto barren ground where they couldn't survive. Rico's hands trembled as he carefully refolded the papers. These documents proved treachery at the highest levels. Men had died for less dangerous secrets. No wonder Running Stream had fled with them, and no wonder bounty hunters had pursued her so relentlessly. He tucked the pouch inside his shirt, close to his skin. Across the fire, Taza slept on, his young face finally peaceful. Rico watched. The boy, feeling the weight of his promise, settled deeper into his heart. He would protect this child, and the truth his mother died to preserve. No matter the cost, Rico stood in the cave's entrance, watching snow pile deeper in the morning light. They couldn't stay here. The cave was too exposed, too far from reliable food and shelter. He turned back to where Taza sat near the dying fire. "We need to head to my cabin," Rico said, gesturing through the cave mouth. "It's safer there. Warm, got food stored up." Taza looked at him with wary eyes, but nodded slowly. The boy gathered the few possessions his mother had carried, a small medicine pouch, a knife with intricate beadwork on its sheath, and a worn blanket. Rico packed his own gear, making sure the leather pouch with the documents was secure inside his shirt. Outside, the snow reached past their ankles. Rico led the way, breaking trail through the deepening drifts. He kept their pace steady, but gentle, mindful of Taz's shorter legs and the rough terrain. The wind bit sharp against their faces. As they descended from the high cave, movement caught Rico's eye, the black stallion following their path through the trees. The horse kept its distance, but its presence remained constant, like a shadow. Watching over their journey, Rico touched the knife at his belt, but the stallion showed no sign of aggression now. By midday, the snow was falling harder. Rico checked the sun's position through the clouds, adjusting their course. His cabin lay a good day's journey away, maybe more, in these conditions. They would need to make camp for the night. As afternoon faded toward evening, Rico spotted a thick stand of spruce trees. Their branches drooped low, creating a natural shelter from the wind and snow. He gestured toward the copse. "We'll rest here," he said. "Get some food in us." While Rico gathered dry wood from under the spruce boughs, Taza moved quietly through the trees, examining the ground. The boy pulled thin strips of sinew from his medicine pouch and began fashioning something with practiced hands. Rico recognized the makings of a snare. He pulled out his own trap-making materials and settled nearby. "Know how to catch rabbits?" he asked, demonstrating the loop and trigger of a simple spring snare. Taz's eyes lit up with interest. He showed Rico his own nearly completed snare. The design was different but clever, using a bent sapling for spring tension. The boy's fingers moved with surprising skill as he demonstrated setting it. "Well now," Rico said, genuine admiration in his voice, "that's mighty fine work." Together, they set 6 snares in likely spots around their camp. Rico noticed how Taza read the small signs of rabbit trails in the snow, choosing his locations. With care, the boy clearly knew his craft. They huddled under the spruce as darkness fell. Rico built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid drawing attention. The stallion's dark form paced the edges of their camp, its hooves nearly silent. The deep snow morning brought the plump rabbits in Taza's snares. The boys skinned them efficiently while Rico broke camp, and they ate the meat quickly before resuming their journey. The second day's travel was harder, the snow now knee-deep in places. Rico kept them moving steadily southeast, watching Taza. For signs of fatigue, the boy showed remarkable endurance, pressing forward without complaint. Late in the day, as the light was fading to purple dusk, Rico's cabin finally came into view. It was a crude structure of rough-hewn logs with a sod roof and a stone chimney, but the sight of it lifted his spirits. Smoke still rose from the chimney. The banked fire he'd left had kept burning. Inside, Rico quickly built up the fire, while Taza stood just inside the door, taking in the simple space. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Traps and tools lined one wall, and a narrow bunk filled with pine boughs occupied another. It wasn't much, but it was warm and dry. "Make yourself at home," Rico said, lighting the oil lamp that hung from a ceiling beam. The yellow light spread warmth through the cabin's single room. He pulled out his cooking pot and some dried venison, starting a hearty stew with the last of the rabbit meat added in, As the stew bubbled, Rico noticed Taz's shoulders gradually relaxing. The boy explored the cabin carefully, examining the various tools with interest. When Rico handed him a bowl of stew, Taz settled cross-legged by the fire, some of the wariness finally leaving his face. After they'd eaten, Rico pulled out a damaged trap that needed mending. He showed Taza how to replace the spring mechanism and adjust the trigger plate. The boy proved a quick study, his small hands working the metal pieces with natural skill. Through the cabin's single window, Rico caught glimpses of the stallion circling in the growing darkness. The horse's coat blended with the night, but its presence was unmistakable. It moved like a guardian spirit, keeping watch as the snow continued to fall. Inside, the lamp's glow and the fire's warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Rico watched Taza work on another trap, the boy's face peaceful in concentration. For the first time since the cave, Rico felt the rightness of his promise to Running Stream. This rough cabin could become a home for them both. Days flowed into a steady rhythm at Rico's cabin. Morning light would filter through the frosted window, finding them already awake and moving. Rico showed Taza how to bank the coals properly, keeping their precious fire alive through the night. The boy learned quickly, his hands small but capable. Outside, snow blanketed the clearing. Rico demonstrated the proper stance for splitting. Logs his axe, singing through the cold air. "Like this," he said, positioning the blade. "Let the weight do the work." Taza watched intently, then tried with a smaller axe. His first attempts glanced off, but soon he found the rhythm dotted the smoke. Rico taught Taza the delicate art of preserving meat. "Too much smoke makes it bitter," he explained, adjusting the hanging venison strips. "Too little, and it spoils." The boy nodded, helping to stoke the small fire below. His nose wrinkled at the strong scent of hickory, but his eyes showed understanding. Checked the trap lines together, Taza pointing out signs Rico might have missed, a bent twig here, disturbed snow there. The boy began teaching Rico words in Apache, speaking them slowly until Rico's clumsy tongue could shape them properly. "Gah," Taza said one evening, pointing to the rabbits they'd caught. "And this," he touched the fire, "is K." Rico repeated the words, and Taza smiled, a rare sight that warmed the cabin more than any fire. At night, the boy would sometimes share stories of his people, speaking softly of ancient heroes and sacred places. Rico listened, hearing in these tales echoes of his own biblical stories. Their evenings settled into comfortable quiet, broken only by the crack of burning logs and the distant cry of winter birds. They would sit by the fire, Rico carving wood or mending traps, while Taza worked on small projects of his own. Weaving grass into tight patterns or fashioning new snares, one crisp morning, Rico woke to find Taza's bed empty, worry-pricked, at him until he looked out the window. There, in the pale dawn light, stood the boy near the edge of the clearing. The black stallion stood before him, its breath making clouds in the cold air. Taz's hand extended, offering something. Rico watched, barely breathing. As the boy whispered gentle words and tossed handfuls of oats toward the massive horse, the stallion's ears flicked forward, nostrils testing the air. With delicate steps, it moved closer to accept the offering. The scene struck Rico like a physical blow. His wife, Sarah, had gentled horses the same way, with infinite patience and soft words. He remembered her standing in their corral back in Kansas, taming the wildest colts with nothing but quiet persistence. The memory, usually so painful, felt different now. Watching Taza with the stallion somehow eased the ache. Day by day, the stallion grew bolder. It would come when Taza called, accepting gentle touches along its nose and neck. The boy spent hours with the horse, speaking to it in Apache, teaching it to trust. Rico kept his distance, but he saw how the stallion's eyes had lost their wild fear. When Sunday came, Rico made a decision. He pulled out his best shirt, worn but clean, and found a smaller one for Taza. "There's a church," he said, "down in the valley. Reckon we should go." Taza looked uncertain but nodded. They rode Rico's mule down the snowy trail, the stallion, following at a distance, like a protective shadow. The small wooden church came into view, its bell calling faithful to worship. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, met them at the door with a warm smile. "Welcome, brother," he said, then bent to greet Taza. "Welcome, young man. But Rico noticed the sideways glances from other congregants, the whispered comments about the Apache boy in their midst. They sat in the back pew. Taza watched everything with careful eyes, the flickering candles, the cross on the wall, the worn hymnals in their hands. When the singing started, Rico found himself opening the book. He hadn't sung since Sarah's death, hadn't trusted his voice to do anything but crack. The familiar words of Amazing Grace filled the small church. Rico's throat tightened, but he forced out the first line. His voice broke on, was lost, but now found tears threatening. But Taza's shoulder pressed against his arm, a small gesture of support, and Rico kept singing dot. Each verse came easier than the last. Rico's voice grew stronger, joining the congregation in praise. He felt something long frozen inside him, beginning to thaw, like spring coming to winter-locked ground. In that moment, surrounded by song and with Taza beside him, Rico felt the first real stirrings of faith he'd known in years. 3 days after their church visit, hoofbeats approached Rico's cabin. The sound made both Rico and Taza tense until they recognized Reverend Matthew's dappled mare. The preacher dismounted carefully, carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Brought you some fresh bread," he called out, stamping snow from his boots on the porch. Sister Martha baked extra after service. The warm, yeasty smell filled the cabin as he unwrapped it. Rico carved thick slices with his hunting knife, and they sat around the rough table. Taza's eyes widened at the first bite. It was a far cry from Rico's heavy fry bread. The preacher watched them both with gentle concern. "Good to see you in church again, Brother Rico," Matthew said, warming his hands on a tin cup of coffee. "The Lord's house has missed your voice these years." Rico nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. "Been a long time, and young Taza is. Welcome to always." The Reverend's face grew serious. "Though I must warn you both, there's trouble brewing. Railroad men have been pressing hard on the tribal lands." Rico's hand strayed to the leather pouch hidden beneath floorboards. "How so?" "Surveyors everywhere, marking lines through Apache territory, making promises they won't keep." Matthews shook his head. "They're squeezing tribes onto smaller and smaller parcels, claiming it's for progress." Taza sat very still, his face carefully blank, but Rico saw his fingers tighten on the bread. The boy understood more English than he let on. "Been meaning to take the boy to the reservation agency," Rico said slowly. "His mother needs proper burial, Apache way." Matthews nodded. "Best do it soon, before winter really sets in." After the preacher left, Rico pulled out the pouch, studying the documents inside. Maps showed water sources, hunting grounds, sacred sites, all marked in careful detail. Treaties bore signatures and official seals, promising protection of these lands. His unease grew. These papers proved something powerful. A week later, they rode toward the reservation agency, the wild stallion following as always. Taza sat behind Rico on the mule, tense against his back. As they approached the agency building, voices carried from inside. "Reassure the tribes this is temporary." A man in a railroad company coat gestured at a map spread across a desk. 2 Army officers nodded, while the Indian agent, a thin man named Parker, scratched notes. "Once the rail line is complete, they'll have access to better markets." The railroad man continued. "They'll thank us for this adjustment to the boundaries." Rico felt Taza's small hand slip into his, squeezing hard. "Mother's papers show truth," the boy whispered in Apache. "They lie about our land, lie about our land." Rico squeezed back, understanding now why Taza's mother had fought so hard to preserve these documents. They proved these temporary adjustments were theft, plain and simple. Agent Parker finally noticed them. "Can I help you?" his tone suggested. "The opposite come about proper burial," Rico said. "Boy's mother. Fill out these forms. We'll process the request when we can." He turned back to the railroad man's map. The Army officers studied Taza with sharp eyes. One fingered his dispatch pouch, similar to the one hidden beneath Rico's cabin floor. Rico's stomach nodded how many others knew about these documents. Much. "Obliged," Rico said stiffly, taking the forms. He guided Taza outside, feeling hostile gazes follow them. In the cold air, Taza trembled. Not from fear, Rico realized, but from anger. The boy's eyes burned as he watched the men through the window. Still bent over their maps of stolen land. "They kill for those papers," Taza said quietly in Apache. Like they killed my family. Rico nodded grimly. The danger wasn't just real, it was growing. These men would stop at nothing to keep their schemes hidden. He thought of the documents in his cabin, proof of all their lies, and knew they had to guard them with their lives. The wild stallion appeared from the trees, watching them with knowing eyes. Rico studied the horse's proud bearing, its refusal to be caught or tamed except on its own terms. Like the Apache, he thought, it would not surrender its freedom easily. "Come on," he told Taza, helping him onto the mule. "We'll find another way to honor your mother." The boy nodded, understanding that they couldn't trust these men with even that simple request. They rode home in silence, both aware that their quiet life in the cabin had changed. The documents hidden beneath the floor weren't just paper anymore. They were a weapon of truth against powerful men's lies, and those men would kill to keep their secrets buried. Moonlight painted the snow silver as Rico and Taza rode home from the reservation agency. The mule's hooves crunched steadily through the crusty drifts, but Rico couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow between the pines seemed to hold searching eyes. Taza sensed it too. The boy sat rigid against Rico's back, his head turning at each snap of a branch or whisper of wind. The wild stallion kept pace through the trees, its dark coat blending with the night, appearing and vanishing like a spirit. Near midnight, Rico spotted something that made his blood run cold. Fresh tracks crossing their path, boot prints, at least 3 men, paralleling their trail through the woods. He pulled the mule to a stop, studying the marks in the snow. "Someone follows," Taza whispered in Apache, his small hand gripping Rico's coat. "Reckon so." Rico clicked the mule forward, but chose a different path home, one that crossed rocky ground where tracks wouldn't show. It added hours to their journey. But better safe than sorry. At the cabin, Rico didn't light a lamp. Working by feel in the darkness, he pried up the hearthstones and tucked the leather pouch deep underneath. The documents would be safer there than beneath the floorboards. Taza helped him replace the stones, careful not to scrape them. The next days passed under a cloud of tension. Rico pushed aside his own worry to focus on teaching Taza everything he knew about survival. They spent hours practicing how to walk, without sound, placing each foot carefully through snow and leaves. "Feel the ground first with your toes," Rico explained, demonstrating. "Then roll your weight forward, slow and steady." Taza copied his movements perfectly, already showing natural skill. They worked with the bow to an old Apache weapon Taza's mother had saved. The boy knew the basics, but Rico helped him refine his aim. "Breathe out as you release," he instructed. "Keep your arms steady." Taza's arrows began finding their marks more often, thudding into tree trunks exactly where he aimed. Between lessons, Rico noticed the wild stallion drawing closer to the cabin each day. The horse no longer spooked at their movements, instead watching their practice with intelligent eyes. One morning, as Rico spread grain for his mule, the stallion approached. The fence. Rico stood very still, barely breathing, as the great black horse stretched its neck toward him. Seconds passed like hours. Then he felt its warm velvet nose brushing his palm, hot breath on his skin. His throat tightened with emotion. "He trusts you now," Taza said softly, appearing at Rico's elbow. "Like I do." The moment broke when they heard hoofbeats on the trail. Rico pushed Taza behind him as Deputy Carl Haskins rode into view, his badge catching the winter sun. "Mornin', Boone," Haskins called, but his friendly tone didn't match his sharp eyes. "Heard you've taken in some company?" "Just helping a boy who needed it," Rico answered carefully. The deputy studied Taza, who stared back without flinching. "Folk in town are talking. Wonder about a half-breed living up here with you." "Ain't natural." Rico's jaw tightened at the slur. "Boy's name is Taza. He's under my protection." "Protection from what?" Haskins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Unless there's something you ain't telling me." "Nothing to tell?" Rico kept his voice level. "We're just living quiet, that's all. Maybe so." Haskins turned his horse. "But if I was you, I'd remember where my loyalties lie. Townfolk don't take kindly to those who choose wrong." The threat hung in the air as he rode away. That evening, Rico heard whispers at the general store when he went for supplies. Conversations stopped when he entered, started again when he left. Words like half-breed and trouble followed him down the street. Even the shopkeeper, who'd known Rico for years, was cold. "Folks are worried," he muttered, counting out Rico's change. Say you're harboring an Indian. Say there might be stolen papers involved. Rico's hand instinctively went to his coat, though the pouch was safely hidden under the hearthstones. People ought to mind their own business. Just telling you what I hear. The shopkeeper wouldn't meet his eyes. Might want to think about your choices, Rico. Back at the cabin, Rico found Taza practicing with the bow in the fading light. The wild stallion grazed nearby, calm as any domesticated horse. The sight would have warmed Rico's heart any other time. But now, it only heightened his worry. They'd built something precious here: trust, family, hope. But forces were gathering to destroy it, just as they'd destroyed Taza's people, and their land's documents hidden beneath the hearth weren't just paper anymore. They were a torch that could light fires of justice or burn their world down around them. Rico watched Taza retrieve his arrows as darkness fell. The stallion's dark, form-keeping watch like a guardian spirit. They'd have to be more careful now. Trust fewer people. Stay ready. Snow fell in thick curtains, piling against the cabin windows until only a gray glow filtered through. The wind howled like a hungry wolf pack, rattling the wooden shutters Rico had nailed shut against the storm. Inside the fireplace, crackled steadily, casting warm light across the single room where Rico and Taza sat close to its heat. 3 days now, Rico muttered, stoking the flames with a poker. He'd counted each sunrise, though they could barely see it through the blizzard. Their world had shrunk to these 4 walls, but strangely, he didn't mind. The cabin that had once echoed with his loneliness now felt different. Taza sat cross-legged on a bearskin, whittling a piece of pine with careful strokes. The boy glanced up, firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "Tell me about her," he said softly. "Your wife." Rico's hand stilled on the poker. He rarely spoke of Sarah, but something about the storm's isolation, the warmth of the fire, and Taza's gentle question opened a door in his heart. "Her name was Sarah," he began, his voice rough. "She could gentle any horse that ever lived. Had a way about her, quiet-like, but strong." He settled back in his chair, memories washing over him. "First time I saw her, she was breaking a Mustang that 3 men couldn't handle, did it with nothing but patience and a handful of corn." Taza nodded, understanding in his eyes. Like the black stallion, he needs patience too. Just like that, Rico agreed. "Sarah would have liked you, boy. She always said the best hearts take time to trust." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm wrapped around them like a blanket, keeping the world at bay. "Mother said our people are like the eagle," Taza offered, setting aside his whittling. "We must be both fierce and gentle, strong enough to survive, soft enough to love." He moved closer to the fire, his voice taking on the rhythm of storytelling. "She taught me our ways, how to read the stars, how to honor the spirits of all living things." Rico listened as Taza shared stories of his tribes, traditions, ceremonies for the changing seasons. Songs for healing, dances that kept ancient memories alive. The boy's words painted pictures of a rich culture Rico had never truly understood before. "Would you learn a prayer?" Taza asked suddenly. "One my mother taught me? My mother taught me?" Rico nodded, something tight in his chest loosening. Taza spoke the words slowly in Apache, helping Rico shape the unfamiliar sounds. Together they repeated the prayer, their voices blending with the storm's song. It was a prayer for protection, for guidance, for the wisdom to walk in beauty. When the blizzard finally released its grip 3 days later, they emerged to find the world transformed. Snow lay deep and pristine, trees bowed under white blankets. The morning sun turned everything to diamond sparkle. "Good hunting weather," Rico said, checking his rifle. "Deer will be moving, looking for food. Want to try tracking some?" Taza's face lit up. They prepared quickly, wrapping dried meat and corn cakes in cloth, checking their weapons. The wild stallion watched from the tree line as they set out, its dark coat stark against the snow. They found deer tracks within an hour. Following them through a stand of aspen, Rico watched proudly as Taza read the signs, here a broken branch, there a kicked-up patch of snow. The boy moved like a shadow, each step placed with care. When they spotted the deer, 3 of them pawing through snow for grass, Taza raised his bow the way Rico had taught him. The arrow flew true, taking down a young buck cleanly. "Well done, son," Rico said without thinking. The word felt right in his mouth, natural as breathing. Taz's eyes shone at the praise, and something shifted between them, permanent as mountain stone. They field-dressed the deer together, Rico teaching and Taza learning, their breath clouding in the cold air. Loading their prize onto the mule, they started the journey home. That's when they heard it, thundering hooves in the snow. The wild stallion burst from the trees, its black mane flying. Rico tensed, pushing Taza behind him, but the horse didn't charge past like usual. Instead, it slowed, approaching with measured steps. Rico held his breath as the magnificent animal came closer. The stallion's eyes, once wild with distrust, now held a different light. Slowly, deliberately, the horse lowered its proud head before Rico. "Well, I'll be," Rico whispered. He reached out, touching the strong neck, feeling the warmth of life beneath his palm. The stallion stood steady, accepting his touch. When Rico carefully slipped a rope around its neck, the horse didn't pull away. Taza watched with shining eyes as Rico fashioned a makeshift bridle from the rope. "He chooses you now," the boy said. "Like I did." Rico's throat tightened. The stallion's submission wasn't defeat. It was a gift of trust, freely given. Just like the trust of the boy, who now called him father in his heart, morning frost-coated. The cabin windows, as Rico stood before the hearth, staring at the loose stones where he'd hidden the leather pouch. His calloused fingers traced the worn edges of the documents inside, maps and treaties that could change everything for Taz's people. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his shoulders. Time to move these. Pouch inside his coat. The papers weren't safe here anymore. Not with strange tracks circling closer to the cabin each night. Taza looked up from where he was mending a pair of worn moccasins. "Where will we take them?" "To the preacher," Rico said, pulling on his heavy coat. Man of God's got more standing in town than an old mountain man. For Castle listened to him. Outside, the wild stallion, no longer so wild, stood quietly while Rico saddled him. The horse's breath steamed in the cold air as Taza stroked its nose. Rico marveled at how the animal that once dragged him through thorns now stood gentle as a plow horse. They mounted together, Taza sitting in front of Rico, and set off down the mountain trail. The stallion's hooves crunched through patches of snow, its stride sure and steady. As they descended into the valley, Rico's unease grew. The town looked peaceful enough, smoke rising from chimneys against the morning sky. But something felt wrong. The little white church sat on the edge of town, its steeple reaching toward heaven. Rico tied the stallion to the hitching post, helping Taza down. Inside, sunlight filtered through colored glass, painting rainbow patterns on empty pews. The preacher emerged from his study, his kind face creasing with concern when he saw their expressions. "Brother Rico, what brings you here so early?" Rico pulled out the leather pouch. "Need your help, preacher. These papers, they're proof of broken treaties, stolen land. Taz's mother died protecting them." The older man examined the documents, his frown deepening. "This is serious business, brother. I've been hearing whispers, railroad men in town asking questions. Deputy Haskins, too, been watching your cabin through a spyglass, they say. Then you understand why we can't keep them," Rico said. "You've got influence here. Make people listen to the truth." The preacher nodded slowly. "I'll help, but you need to be careful leaving town. I've seen the church door banged open." Deputy Haskins strode in, his badge glinting dully on his chest. 2 railroad men flanked him, their fancy coats dusty from riding. "Well now," Haskins drawled, hand resting on his gun belt. "Ain't this interesting? Got reports of you harboring fugitives, Boone? That boy there's wanted for questioning?" Rico stepped in front of Taza. "He's just a child. His mother's dead and buried." "That's so." Haskins' eyes narrowed. "Then you won't mind if we take him to the Indian agent. Need to sort out where he belongs." "He belongs with me," Rico growled. The deputy's gaze caught on the leather pouch in the preacher's hands. Something hungry flashed in his eyes. "That you got there, preacher? Everything happened fast then." The preacher tried to hide the pouch, but one of the railroad men snatched it. Rico lunged forward, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The documents scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. "Taza, run!" Rico shouted, shoving the boy toward the door. "Take the stallion, ride hard." The boy hesitated for just a moment, tears in his eyes, then bolted. The stallion's hooves thundered away as Haskins drew his pistol. "Big mistake, Boone," the deputy snarled. Rico saw the gun, but swinging toward his head. Pain exploded behind his eyes. The church floor rushed up. To meet him, rainbow light dancing across his vision. The last thing he heard was the preacher's voice, raised in protest. Then darkness took him. He awoke to cold iron around his wrists and the familiar smell of the jail's musty straw. His head throbbed where Haskins had struck him. Through the small window, he could see the sun was lower. He'd been out for hours. Finally awake. "Are you?" Haskins's voice came from beyond the cell bars. The deputy held up the leather pouch, now empty. "Railroad boys are mighty interested in these papers. Seems they prove some things. The turbest left unproven." Rico struggled. To sit up, "Where's Taza?" "Oh, don't you worry about that Indian boy," Haskins smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "We caught him trying to sneak back into town. He's safe and sound over at the reservation agency. They'll know what to do with him." Rico's heart clenched. He'd failed them both, Taza and his mother. The documents that could have protected their people's land were now in the hands of the very men who meant to steal it. And Taza, brave, trusting Taza, was captured too. He slumped against the cold cell wall, his thoughts spinning like leaves in a storm. Outside, thunder rolled across the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard the Stallion's cry. Rico's head throbbed as consciousness returned. Cold stone pressed against his back, and iron shackles bit into his wrists. The jail cell smelled of musty straw and despair. Through swollen eyes, he surveyed his prison for walls of rough-hewn stone, iron bars, and a tiny window that let in the last rays of sunset. Boot heels clicked on wooden floorboards. Deputy Haskins appeared, twirling the empty leather pouch. Between his fingers, the man's smile was cold as a rattler's. "Comfortable, Boone." Haskins leaned against the bars, tapping the pouch against his leg. "Got some news might interest you? Those railroad fellows, they're mighty pleased with these papers. Reckon they'll disappear real quiet-like, along with any proof of broken treaties." Rico stayed silent, but his hands clenched into fists. "Oh, and that Apache boy of yours." Haskins continued, enjoying himself. "Army's taking him east at first light. Fine boarding school waiting for him. Teach him to forget all that savage nonsense. Wagons already hitched up." The words hit Rico like physical blows. Taza sent away to have his heritage stripped from him. The thought of the boy's proud spirit being crushed made Rico's chest ache worse than his injuries. "You're destroying lives," Rico rasped. "All for railroad money. Way I see it, I'm bringing civilization to the territory." Haskins straightened his badge. "You ought to thank me. Instead, you'll rot in here until trial, if you survive that long." The deputy's boots echoed away, leaving Rico alone with his failure. He'd promised Taza's mother he'd protect the boy. Now both child and documents were lost. The weight of defeat pressed down on him like a mountain of stone. Hours crept by. Night deepened outside the tiny window. Rico slumped against the wall, his prayers dying unspoken in his throat. He thought of Taza's mother, of her dying trust, of Taza himself, who'd brought life back to Rico's hollow existence. Even the wild stallion had learned to trust him, and what good had it done any of them? A shadow moved near the cell. Rico tensed, expecting Haskins again. Instead, the preacher's familiar face appeared in the darkness. The old man glanced nervously over his shoulder before approaching the bars. "Brother Rico," he whispered, "the Lord works in mysterious ways." Something metallic clinked softly as the preacher pressed an object through the bars, a key. Rico stared at it, uncomprehending. "The deputy's busy celebrating at the saloon," the preacher explained quietly. "Won't notice until morning, but you'll need to hurry. That army wagon leaves at dawn." Rico's fingers closed around the key. "Why risk this for me?" The preacher's kind eyes crinkled. "The Lord doesn't waste a willing heart, brother. You took in that boy when others turned away. Showed him love when he had none. That's God's work, plain as day." "I failed him," Rico muttered. "Failed his mother's trust." "No." The preacher's voice was firm. "You gave that boy hope. Now he needs you more than ever. The choice is yours. But I reckon the good Lord didn't lead you this far to abandon you now." Rico looked at the key in his palm. His body ached from the beating, bruises throbbing with each breath. But underneath the pain, something else stirred, the same fierce protectiveness that had first made him shelter a grieving Apache boy. "Thank you," he whispered. The preacher nodded. "I'll be praying for you both. Now hurry, dawn's coming fast." As the preacher's footsteps faded, Rico gripped the key tightly. His fingers trembled as he worked it into the lock, each metallic scrape sounding thunderous in the quiet cell. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open with a soft creak. Rico forced his battered body to move. Every step sent pain shooting through his muscles, but he pushed through it. The outer door was unlocked at the preacher's work. Again, cool night air hit his face as he emerged into darkness. Stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Rico pressed himself against the jail's shadow, catching his breath. Dawn wasn't far off. Soon the army wagon would take Taza away, unless Rico could reach him first. He touched the cross that hung around his neck, his wife's last gift. For years after her death, he'd questioned his faith. But now, with the preacher's key warming in his palm and determination burning in his heart, Rico felt something he hadn't known in a long time: purpose. "Lord," he whispered into the night, "give me strength." Then he pushed away from the wall. Moving deeper into the shadows, dawn was coming, and he had a boy to save. Rico eased the jail's back door closed, his heart pounding against his ribs. Midnight's darkness wrapped around him like a cloak, broken only by starlight glinting off. Patches of snow. His bruised body protested each movement as he crouched in the shadows, listening for any sign he'd been discovered. The town slept. Only distant piano notes from the saloon disturbed the quiet, where Deputy Haskins celebrated his victory. Jaw tightened at the thought of the stolen documents. He needed to find Taza first. The boy's safety mattered more than papers. A soft nickering froze him in place. There, at the edge of the jail yard, a darker shadow moved against the night. Rico squinted, hardly daring to believe. The wild stallion stood waiting, its coat black as midnight, reins trailing in the snow. "How did you?" Rico whispered, inching closer. The horse's ears flicked forward at his voice. Rico reached out slowly, touching the warm neck. The stallion remained still, as if understanding the need for silence. Then Rico heard it, a faint crying carried on the wind. Taz's voice, distant but clear enough to guide the horse that had formed such a bond with the boy. The stallion must have followed the sound, somehow knowing Rico would need him. "Thank you," Rico murmured, stroking the muscled shoulder. "The Lord does work in mysterious ways." His fingers trembled with cold as he checked the saddle straps. The preacher had thought of everything. Saddlebags contained bread, jerky, and even Rico's old rifle. He sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the holy man's courage. Rico's injuries screamed as he pulled himself into the saddle. Gritting his teeth, he guided the stallion away from town, keeping to the softest ground to muffle their passage. Only when they cleared the last buildings did he risk picking up speed. The winter plains stretched endless before them. Pale under starlight, Rico hunched low over the stallion's neck, letting the horse run. Wind burned his face as they flew across the snow-dusted earth. The steady drum of hoofbeats matched his heartbeat, both racing against time. He tried to think clearly through, the pain clouding his mind. The army wagon would take the main trail east, aiming to reach the railroad junction by noon. If he pushed hard through the night, he might catch them before dawn. But then what? Soldiers. "Lord," he whispered into the stallion's flying mane, "show me a way without bloodshed." Rico marveled at the creature's endurance. This was the same wild spirit that had dragged him to Taza in the first place, now carrying him to save the boy. The Lord's hand was clear in it. If he had eyes to see Dot, snow began falling as they crossed the open range. Rico pulled his coat tighter, scanning the darkness ahead. The wagon would have left tracks, but fresh snow threatened to cover them. He had to trust the stallion's instincts now. Following wherever Taz's distant cries led them, his thoughts churned like the horse's thundering hooves. The documents in that pouch could help dozens of families keep their lands, their ways of life. But going after them meant facing Haskins and his railroad men willing to kill to keep their secrets. Rico touched his bruised ribs, remembering their ruthlessness. The stallion crested a low rise, giving them a view across the moonlit plain. Rico pulled up, studying the landscape. Everything he knew. The boy had already lost his mother. Rico refused to let him lose his heritage too. "Just hold on, son," he murmured into the night. "I'm coming." The stallion tossed its head and surged forward again, powerful muscles bunching. Beneath Rico, snow swirled around them as they raced through the darkness, two shadows moving as one across the winter range. With each stride, Rico felt his purpose strengthen. The Lord had given him a second chance at family through Taza. He wouldn't waste it. His body ached, and dawn wasn't far off. But Rico Boone had found something stronger than pain. Love of a father for his son. He leaned forward, giving the stallion its head. Together, they thundered through the night, racing time itself to save a boy who had brought healing to them both. The snow fell thicker now, but Rico kept his eyes fixed ahead. Somewhere in the darkness, a wagon rolled east, and in that wagon, a brave young Apache boy waited, not knowing help was coming. Rico touched his wife's cross and whispered a prayer into the wind. The Lord had led him this far. He had to believe there was a way to make things right. Dawn's first gray light crept across the frozen plains, painting shadows on crusty snow. Rico's muscles burned from hours of hard riding, but his eyes remained sharp. The stallion's breathing came heavy beneath him as they crested a low rise. There, the wagon. It crawled like a dark beetle across the white landscape, approaching a creek bed where ice gleamed dully. In the wagon's bed, Rico glimpsed a small, huddled form. His heart clenched. Taza. Deputy Haskins rode point, his badge catching the weak light. Rico's jaw tightened at the sight of the man who'd beaten him, who'd stolen both boy and documents. Reached the creek's edge, wheels crunching on frozen snow. Rico pressed his knees to the stallion's flanks, urging him forward. They moved like smoke through the dim light, closing distance rapidly. The first shot cracked across the morning stillness. Snow puffed near Rico's head as one guard spotted them. The stallion's muscles bunched beneath him, gathering power. Rico leaned low over its neck as more bullets whined past. "Hold on, boy!" he shouted. The stallion gathered itself and launched forward, sailing over the ice-crusted creek in one mighty leap. They landed running. Snow sprang up behind powerful hooves. Chaos erupted. The guards' horses reared, throwing off their riders' aim. Rico drove straight for the wagon, where Taza was struggling against his bonds. The boy's eyes went wide with recognition. Deputy Haskins wheeled his horse around, drawing his pistol. "Stop right there, Boone." Rico ignored him, reaching the wagon's side. In one fluid motion, he scooped Taza up and onto the stallion. The boy clung to him, trembling but alive. Haskins roared in fury, spurring his horse forward. His gun swung up, but Rico was ready. He kicked out hard, catching the deputy's wrist. The weapon went spinning away into the snow. The two men crashed together, rolling from their horses into the frozen creek bed. Rico's bruised ribs screamed as Haskins landed a punch. They grappled in the snow, trading blows. The deputy fought dirty, trying to gouge Rico's eyes. Rico caught his wrist, twisting until Haskins cried out. One sharp strike laid the deputy flat. Rico's hand found a rock, heavy and cold. So easy to end it here, to crush the skull of the man who'd caused such pain. But Taza was watching, and Rico remembered the preacher's words about willing hearts. "Frontier justice is no justice at all," Rico declared, letting the rock fall. He plucked the leather pouch from Haskins' belt instead. The deputy lay gasping, blood streaming from his nose. His eyes held fear now, seeing mercy where he'd expected none. The guards stood frozen, weapons lowered, watching the scene unfold. Swung back onto the stallion, tucking Taza securely before him. The boy's arms wrapped tight around his waist as they wheeled away, leaving Haskins sprawled in the bloody snow. The morning sun climbed higher as Rico and Taza rode into town, the stallion's hooves clicking steadily on the hard-packed street. Outside the white-painted church, a crowd had gathered. Tribal elders in blankets and beaded vests stood beside townsfolk in their Sunday best. The preacher waited on the steps, his Bible clutched tight. Rico dismounted first, helping Taza down. The boy's spine was straight as a lodgepole pine, his chin lifted with quiet dignity. The stallion, now gentle as a plow horse, lowered its head to crop grass near the hitching post. "Brothers and sisters," the preacher called out, his voice carrying. Across the murmuring crowd, we gather to hear truth long buried. Rico withdrew the leather pouch, its surface worn smooth by desperate hands. He passed it carefully to the eldest of the Apache leaders, a man whose face was etched with years of watching promises turn to dust. The elder's weathered fingers trembled as he opened the pouch. He drew out yellowed papers, maps marked with spring locations, treaties bearing official seals. His eyes grew bright as he studied them. These documents, the elder spoke in clear English, show where the railroad men lied. They prove the water. Rights were never sold, the grazing lands were never ceded. He held up a map. See here, their own surveyors marked the boundaries they now deny. Whispers rustled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Some townsfolk shifted uneasily, avoiding their neighbors' eyes. Others stood straighter, nodding as truth laid bare the frauds committed in their name. Deputy Haskins pushed through the crowd, his face still bruised. That Apache boy's mother was a thief, he shouted. Those papers were stolen. No! Rico's voice cut through the tension. She protected what was already theirs. The real theft was in the lies told to take it away. The preacher stepped forward. Opening his Bible, Exodus 20, verse 16, he read clearly, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." The Lord's word is clear on this matter. More townspeople nodded now. Mrs. Baker from the general store spoke up. "Ain't right. What's been done? Ain't Christian neither." The tribal elder carefully returned the documents to their pouch. "These will go to the Indian Agency in Denver," he declared. "With these proofs, they cannot deny our rights to the land." Taza pressed against Rico's side, a smile breaking across his face like sunrise. Rico rested his hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the strength there. The stallion lifted, its head nickering softly. Like the wild horse that had finally accepted a gentle hand, the town seemed to be learning that trust, once given, could heal old wounds. The preacher raised his arms in blessing over the gathered people, Indian and white alike. "Let us pray," he said, "for wisdom to walk forward together in truth." Rico bowed his head, Taz's warmth steady beside him. Through closed eyes, he felt the morning sun on his face, promising light after long darkness. The late February sun warmed the mountain air, melting patches of snow into silvery streams. Rico guided his horse along a narrow trail, with Taza riding the stallion beside him. The black horse, once wild as a storm wind, now moved with steady grace beneath the boy's gentle hands. They crested a high ridge overlooking the valley. The reservation spread out like a patchwork quilt, tipis dotting the landscape, smoke rising from cooking fires. The railroad tracks gleamed distantly, no longer a symbol of loss, but of boundaries respected. Rico pulled his horse to a halt, drinking in the view. The saddlebags were heavy with supplies, medicine, dried meat, and letters from the Indian Agency confirming the treaties would be honored. His heart felt full, watching Taza scan the horizon with keen eyes. Rico Taza's voice was quiet, but, "Clear, will you?" He hesitated, fingers twisting in the stallion's dark mane. "Will you keep me, forever?" Rico turned in his saddle to face the boy. Sunlight caught the silver threads in his beard as he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, chasing away the last shadows of old grief. "Listen close, son," he said, the word flowing naturally now. "You're mine by the blood of the heart, stronger than any paper or promise could make us." Taz's face brightened like dawn breaking. The stallion beneath him tossed its head, as if nodding agreement. Together they rode down toward the reservation, their horses' hooves drumming a steady rhythm on the thawing earth. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the sky in sweeping brushstrokes of rose and gold. Its rays caught the three figures as they moved along the ridge. Man, boy, and stallion casting their silhouettes against the lightening sky. They rode as one family now, carrying hope like spring's first warmth. Behind them, the sun rose, fully blessing their path with promise of days to come. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.